Everyone watched her steal the silver locket, except she was 3 miles away when it happened. How did an entire town miss something so obvious? Millbrook was the kind of place where neighbors still waved from their porches and left their doors unlocked at night. Population 3,847, 2 traffic lights, and 1 diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Everyone knew everyone else's business, which most folks considered a blessing rather than a curse. Makes sense, right? Small towns thrive on trust. But that trust started cracking like old paint in July when Mrs. Henderson noticed her cash register coming up short 3 weeks in a row. $20 here, $15 there. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make her recount twice before closing up shop. Then old Pete from the hardware store mentioned missing tools, not the cheap stuff either, but the good German wrenches that cost real money. Well, coincidences happen, except they kept happening. The bakery lost a whole tray of wedding rings, the expensive gold-plated kind they displayed in the window. The pharmacy reported prescription bottles going missing, though thankfully nothing dangerous. Even the church collection box seemed lighter than usual, which Father McKenna mentioned with a puzzled shake of his head during Sunday service. Here's where things get interesting. Instead of calling in professional investigators or installing security cameras, the good people of Millbrook did what small towns do best. They started talking. Coffee shop conversations turned into detective meetings. Bridge club gatherings became strategy sessions. And the weird part is, everyone reached the same conclusion without any actual evidence. Outsiders were to blame. The reasoning seemed foolproof to them. Longtime residents wouldn't steal from their own neighbors, would they? Had to be someone new, someone who didn't understand how things worked around here. The finger-pointing began immediately, and it pointed straight at the handful of families who'd moved to town within the past year. But even among the newcomers, one person stood out like a sore thumb. Sarah Chen, a 17-year-old whose family had relocated from the city just 4 months earlier. Her father worked remotely for some tech company nobody really understood, and her mother kept to herself, shopping quickly and speaking to few people. Sarah walked differently than the local kids, dressed differently too. She listened to music through earbuds instead of joining conversations, ate lunch alone at school, and worst of all, she didn't seem particularly interested in fitting in. To a town that valued conformity above almost everything else, this felt suspicious. Let's not forget that teenagers make perfect scapegoats. They can't vote, rarely have lawyers on speed dial, and their word carries about as much weight as tissue paper in a hurricane. The gossip mill worked overtime, spinning stories about Sarah's suspicious behavior and attitude problems. Within 2 weeks, half the town had convinced themselves they'd found their thief. The other half just went along with it because arguing seemed like more trouble than it was worth. Nobody bothered checking facts or timelines or asking basic questions like whether Sarah had actually been present during any of the thefts. The stage was set for justice, small-town style. What happened next would test everything Millbrook claimed to believe about fairness and community values. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store spotted something glinting in the teenage girl's backpack during what everyone called a routine check. A silver locket that belonged to the pharmacist's wife had somehow found its way there. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. Nobody bothered asking how she got it. Nobody wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had found it somewhere and planned to return it. The girl tried explaining she'd picked it up near the school playground, intending to ask around about its owner, but her words hit a wall of already made-up minds. Detective Morrison took one look at the evidence and declared it the clearest case he'd seen all year. Makes sense, right? New girl in town, missing items, stolen property in her possession. The math seemed simple enough. Too simple, some might say, but nobody was asking the hard questions. The investigation that had dragged on for weeks suddenly wrapped up in a single afternoon. Then there's the small detail that changed her life forever. When the girl's parents rushed to the police station, their daughter was already crying in the back of a patrol car. Her explanation about finding the locket fell on deaf ears. Detective Morrison had seen enough teenage thieves to know guilt when he saw it, or so he claimed. The town meeting that evening buzzed with satisfied whispers. Finally, justice would be served. The girl's family pleaded for more time, more investigation, anything that might reveal the truth. But popular opinion had already written the verdict in permanent ink. And the weird part is how quickly exile became the chosen punishment. Not community service, not probation, not even a stern warning with close supervision. The town council voted 7-2 to banish her beyond the county line within 48 hours. They wanted to send a message that would echo through every household. Mayor Roberts explained their reasoning with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything. The community needed to heal, he said. Trust needed rebuilding. Sometimes harsh examples prevented future problems. The two dissenting council members kept their objections quiet after the meeting ended. Her parents packed what they could carry into 2 small suitcases. The girl's younger brother kept asking when she'd come home for dinner. Nobody had a good answer for that question. Studies from similar cases suggest that once a community makes this kind of decision, changing course becomes nearly impossible. Detective Morrison filed his final report that Thursday morning, 1 page, 3 paragraphs. The shortest investigation summary in the department's recent history. He moved on to other cases, leaving behind a family torn apart and a teenager facing an uncertain future. But here's what nobody expected. Sometimes the people watching from the edges notice things that everyone else misses. And sometimes those quiet observers decide that truth matters more than convenience. The town had spoken. Pack your things, get out, and don't come back. That was it for Sarah, a 17-year-old girl who went from attending high school to becoming an exile in less than 24 hours. They gave her a backpack, some cash that wouldn't last a week, and a stern warning. Cross back into town limits, face real legal trouble. The county line became her new prison wall, except this one stretched endlessly in every direction except home. Her first night hit different than anything she'd ever experienced. Sleeping in a hay barn sounds romantic in movies, right? Well, reality came with itchy straw, mice scurrying around her head, and temperatures that dropped to near freezing. The kind of cold that seeps through your bones and makes you wonder if you'll wake up at all. Then there's the hunger. Skipping meals at home because you're busy is one thing. Going days with nothing but gas station crackers, that's survival mode your body isn't prepared for. Sarah learned quickly that empty fields don't offer room service. But here's where things got really twisted. Word spread faster than wildfire to every rancher, farmer, and property owner within 50 miles. Help her and you'll face fines from the county. The town made sure their message was crystal clear. This girl was dangerous, and anyone showing kindness would pay the price. Makes sense, right? Punish the helpers to make sure the punishment sticks. Except most people in rural areas actually have hearts. They just couldn't risk their livelihoods for a stranger. Sarah wandered from fence line to fence line, sleeping wherever she could find shelter. Abandoned sheds became 5-star hotels. Creek water turned into fine dining. And every morning brought the same question: how much longer could this go on? Studies show that nearly 70% of people forced into exile never return to their original communities. That's not just about geography. It's about broken trust, damaged reputation, and the simple fact that starting over somewhere else often feels easier than fighting to prove your innocence. Well, Sarah was quickly becoming part of that statistic. Each passing day made the idea of clearing her name seem more impossible. Who would listen to a girl living like a vagrant? Who would believe her story when the entire town had already decided she was guilty? The irony, while she struggled to find her next meal, the real thief was probably back home, laughing at how perfectly their plan had worked. Someone was sleeping in a warm bed while Sarah counted stars and tried to ignore her growling stomach. And the weird part is how invisible you become once society decides you don't belong. Sarah walked past cars, houses, and people who looked right through her, like she'd become a ghost haunting the edges of civilization. But ghosts have a funny way of catching people's attention, especially when someone with sharp eyes and a questioning mind starts paying attention to details everyone else missed. The rancher had seen enough stolen cattle in his 40 years to know when something didn't add up. While everyone else celebrated catching the thief, he kept thinking about timing. The girl arrived in town 3 months ago. But those thefts, they started back in spring, a full 6 months earlier. Funny how nobody bothered checking that detail. He pulled out his old notebook where he tracked everything: weather, livestock movements, suspicious activity. Ranchers write everything down because memory fails when you're dealing with lawyers or insurance companies. The patterns were clear as daylight. Most thefts happened on weekends when the girl was volunteering at the library. The timing made 0 sense. Then there's the security footage everyone forgot about. The hardware store owner mentioned having cameras, but nobody asked to see them. Not the police, not the angry townspeople, nobody. Well, the rancher asked. Turns out those cameras caught plenty of interesting visitors during theft times. But here's where it gets personal for him. 3 nights after the exile, he spotted a small figure sleeping behind his barn, soaking wet from rain, shivering like a lost calf. The rancher had been warned not to help, but watching a kid freeze goes against everything decent people believe in. He started leaving things where she might find them. Nothing obvious that would get him in trouble. A thermos of coffee by the old fence post, sandwiches wrapped in plastic near the creek, a warm jacket hanging on a tree branch that looked accidentally dropped. Makes sense, right? Sometimes helping people requires creativity. The weird part is how good she was at staying hidden. Most people make noise, leave trash, disturb animals. This girl moved through his property like smoke, never took more than she needed. Always left areas cleaner than she found them. Definitely not the behavior of someone who steals for fun. Meanwhile, the rancher kept investigating. He talked to farmers on neighboring properties, asking casual questions about strangers they'd seen. One detail kept coming up, a beat-up red truck that appeared near theft locations. Same truck, different times, different places. Let's not forget that ranchers spend most of their time watching. We notice vehicles, people, changes in routine. It's how we protect our livelihood. The red truck belonged to someone who knew the area well, someone locals trusted enough to ignore. The rancher gathered receipts from gas stations, talked to delivery drivers, even checked with the post office about unusual activity. Every piece of evidence pointed away from the exiled girl and towards someone much more familiar. But collecting evidence and convincing people are totally different problems. This town had already made up its mind. They wanted their villain caught, case closed, everyone back to feeling safe. Admitting they got it wrong meant admitting they destroyed an innocent person's life. Well, the rancher wasn't giving up. He knew exactly who needed to hear this information first. Someone with both influence and integrity. Someone who could make the town listen without making them feel stupid. Because what he'd discovered would change everything. Assuming anyone was brave enough to face the truth. The rancher knew he couldn't sit on this evidence forever. Walking into the police station felt like carrying a loaded gun. Neither dangerous, but necessary. The new police chief, barely 3 months on the job, listened as the rancher spread out photos, timestamps, and witness statements across his desk. Security footage showed the real thief. A man who visited town regularly for work, someone locals trusted completely. Well, that changed everything. The chief called in the town elder, Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived there for 60 years. She examined the evidence with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too many mistakes. Her face went pale when she realized what they'd done. The girl they'd exiled, completely innocent. Here's where things get messy, though. Admitting you're wrong as a town is like trying to unring a bell, technically possible, but the sound already echoed everywhere. The town council met in emergency session. They drafted an apology letter. They voted to invite her back. They even offered to pay for her troubles. But money can't buy back trust, can it? When the girl returned, something had shifted in her eyes. The warmth that newcomers usually brought was gone, replaced by the careful watchfulness of someone who'd learned that safety is an illusion. She accepted their apologies politely. She moved back into her old apartment. Yet everyone could feel the invisible wall she'd built around herself. Then there's the uncomfortable truth about second chances. National studies reveal only 20% of wrongly accused people ever feel fully accepted again in their communities. The other 80% live with a permanent question mark hanging over their heads. People wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were guilty of something else. The rancher watched from his porch as life supposedly returned to normal. Kids still played in the streets. Shops reopened with their usual bustle, but neighbors who'd been quick to point fingers now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. The girl who'd been wronged walked through town like a ghost present, but not really there. Makes you wonder about the real cost of jumping to conclusions, right? The actual thief was arrested quietly, with none of the fanfare that had surrounded the girl's exile. No town meetings, no dramatic confrontations. Just a brief mention in the local paper that most people probably skipped over. The rancher's actions had restored justice on paper. The girl's name was cleared. The real criminal faced charges. Everything looked neat and tidy in the official records. Yet the scars remained visible to anyone paying attention. Trust, once shattered, doesn't heal like a broken bone. It stays fragile, prone to breaking again at the slightest pressure. The town had learned this lesson the hard way, though whether they'd remember it when the next crisis arrived remained an open question. Some lessons stick, others fade faster than morning fog, leaving communities vulnerable to repeating their worst mistakes all over again.